Hi, my name is Robert Painter. I'm the legal director at American Gateways, one of the organizations that is a member of the Texas Here to Stay Coalition. Today, I'm going to talk with you briefly about how you can prepare for your asylum interview. Your asylum interview is an important part of your asylum application, and you should be sure to make adequate preparations. If you are an Afghan national who is paroled into the U.S. under Operation Allies Welcome between July 2021 and September 2022, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, also known as USCIS, is required to schedule you for an interview within 45 days of filing your application, and ideally to process your application to completion within 150 days. We cannot guarantee that USCIS will be able to complete applications within this timeline, but they have committed to making these cases a priority. How should you prepare for your interview? All asylum interviews occur in person at the USCIS Houston Asylum Office for people who live in Texas. The main applicant, as well as any family members included on the application, must attend the interview. Houston is approximately a 3-hour journey by car from the Austin area. Most interview appointments are scheduled early in the morning. For these reasons, it is a good idea to travel to Houston the evening before the interview if possible. Otherwise, make sure to set aside plenty of travel time the morning of the interview to account for traffic and other delays. You may only receive notice of your interview 2 or 3 weeks prior to the date, so you will want to make the following arrangements right away after receiving your interview notice. Accommodation. If you plan to spend the night before the interview in Houston, confirm that your hotel or other accommodation is located close to the Houston Asylum Office. You can check their address on the interview notice itself. Houston is a large city and travel time between 2 points can be quite long, so it is very important that your accommodation is close to the Houston Asylum Office. Second, transportation. Make plans for how you will get to and from Houston the day before and after your interview. Meals. There are a few restaurants or stores located near the Houston Asylum Office. Consider packing meals to bring with you, both for the evening before and the morning of the interview. And lastly, childcare. If you have young children who need to travel with you to the interview, you should arrange for a caregiver to watch them at the asylum office during the interview. Asylum interviews can be very long, more than 3 hours long in many cases. We recommend that you pack water and eat a filling meal in advance of your appointment. The morning of the interview, plan to arrive at the asylum office 30 minutes before your appointment time to allow yourself to pass through security and check in. No sharp objects or weapons will be allowed in. At check-in, you may have your photograph and fingerprints taken as part of your application. You must bring all of your original documents, such as passports, birth certificates, ID badges, letters, or other things, to your asylum interview, even if you have previously submitted copies. Make sure they are organized so that you can access them easily if requested to do so. You should also bring your interview appointment notice with you. If you hire an attorney after you file your application for asylum, but before your interview, they will be permitted to attend the interview with you, though they will typically not play an active role that day. If you have additional documents that you wish to submit in your case, remember, you should mail them to the Houston Asylum Office at least 7 days before the interview if possible. You may file documents in your case the same day as the interview, but this is strongly discouraged and may cause delays in your case. Whenever you file supplemental documents with the Houston Asylum Office, you must provide them in duplicate, meaning 2 copies of everything. All documents must be in English or include a certified English translation if they're in another language, such as Dari or Pashto. Do not mail or hand file original documents. The purpose of the asylum interview is to gather information so that U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services can make a decision in your case. Currently, due to COVID restrictions, USCIS requires that you consent to the use of their telephonic interpreters during an interview. They are required to provide interpretation for many languages, including Dari and Pashto. You have a right to speak in your best language at your interview. Do not feel pressure to proceed in a language that you do not speak fluently. If the asylum office cannot find an interpreter, they will reschedule your interview for another day. If you speak English fluently and feel comfortable proceeding in English, you may do so. Under current COVID protocols, Asylum applicants may be seated in the same office as their interviewing officer with a plexiglass partition between them. Masks are required for all unvaccinated applicants and optional for vaccinated applicants. In some cases, particularly where there's a large family included on an application, the applicants may be seated in one office and the officer in another office, and they will then be connected by televideo equipment. If at any point you cannot hear or understand the officer, you should say so to make sure that you are understood completely. You will be interviewed that day by an asylum officer. Asylum officers are not law enforcement agents. They are employees of USCIS trained on asylum matters. Asylum interviews are not interrogations, and you should expect to be treated with respect. Under current COVID protocols, excuse me, at the beginning of the interview, the asylum officer will introduce themselves and explain to you how the interview should go. They may review some documents with you and ask you to review and sign them. If you cannot read English, they can have an interpreter read them to you in your best language. You should never sign a document that you do not understand. Ask that the document be interpreted to you if you do not understand. You can also ask the officer to explain what the documents are if you have questions. The asylum officer will then ask you to swear or confirm that you will tell the truth, and then will begin the interview. Normally, asylum interviews will take place in 3 parts. The first part of the interview involves reviewing your application form, called the Form I-589, to make any changes or updates. You should review your application form before coming to the interview and make notes of any corrections or changes. Typical changes may include addresses, phone numbers, or name spellings. The asylum officer will make these changes on your application by hand and then ask you to review and consent to those changes. The second part of the interview involves discussing the substance of your asylum claim. You will be asked numerous questions about why you are afraid to return to your country. It is important to be honest, thorough, and specific in your responses. If you do not understand a question, tell the officer right away. Do not embellish or lie. If you do not know the answer to a question, or if you are unsure about it, say so. This portion of the interview can be tiring. If you need to take a break, ask for one. Asylum officers generally take notes on their computers during interviews. It is common for them to appear distracted or disengaged from your story, but this does not mean that your interview is going poorly. Try to stay focused on telling your story. If at any point you have serious concerns about the behavior of the officer interviewing you, you may request to speak with a supervisor. Asking to speak with the supervisor will not prejudice your case. If your spouse or your children or both are on your application and physically present with you in the United States, they must also attend your interview. The asylum officer will want to ask them questions as well, generally at the beginning or the end of the interview. These questions are meant to screen your family for any potential bars to asylum eligibility. Once the questioning is complete, your family members can leave the room. In the third and final part of the interview, the officer will ask you several questions to determine whether you are ineligible for asylum for specific reasons under U.S. law. These questions usually focus on whether you have had any contact with violent or extremist groups, if you have ever been arrested, or if you have ever harmed anyone. In some cases, the officer may want to review and consent to your answers in writing. Make sure you review everything carefully before signing any documents. Ask that the document be read to you in your best language. You should also ask for a copy of the document to keep for your records. After your interview, you should not expect to receive a decision on the same day. The asylum office will issue your decision by mail within 6 months of your interview date. If you move during that time, you must update your address on the USCIS website using Form AR-11. It's also recommended that you mail a copy of the Form AR-11 directly to the Houston Asylum Office. If USCIS at some point relaxes COVID protocols, you may end up being scheduled for a time to return to the asylum office to receive your decision in person, though this is unlikely to occur in the near future. I hope this information was helpful to you. If at any point following the submission of your application, you have questions or about documents you receive, you are more than welcome to contact American Gateways or any of the other organizations that make up the Texas Here to Stay Coalition. Thank you for your time and good luck.